All right, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to figure out the future for smart buildings or smarter buildings. Our profiles, in case you wonder who we are listed on mondaylive.org. Please head over there for that. Point to note, important is that views expressed here are personal and not of any company or organization, so it's all down to the individuals. And let's make this as interactive as possible using the Zoom chat. It'll be great. And in case you need any of the links or information provided on the slide deck, it is also available on mondaylive.org. Okay, so this being October and the start of a new month, we have a new theme of industry metamorphosis. I think I got that pretty good.
You gotta say it three. You gotta say it 3 times fast, Anto, to know that you really got it.
Once again.
Metamorphosis.
Good.
There you go. I pass. We'll talk a lot more about that. Our agenda, normal news and trends, and then talk about metamorphosis, and hopefully have a really interesting conversation about all of that. But before we jump into that, hand it over to Mr. Ken Sinclair for an update from him.
Thanks, Anto. Yeah, pretty busy over here trying to get ready for Chicago AHR. Another aspect that I'm not sure everybody understands is the sponsors and contributing editors of Automated Buildings give us the power to have some time to investigate and interact with social media and try and keep us all current. I'm not sure I do that, but I do make a big effort. Probably spend at least an hour or two a day trying to piece together what our industry is doing. So that's kind of an added value of the support of the dynamic library of Automated Buildings. Anyway, so we're putting our programs together. I'm extremely excited about the evolving sessions. The breadth and the width of content is truly amazing. It reflects a lot of stuff that's going on across our desk here. This news release came out, and I caught it on social media of one of our sponsors, Passive Logic. I think it's worthwhile for us to read because the creator of the first platform for generative autonomy announced today has pre-sold its Hive platform. And if you follow that through, you'll actually see that this is the first we see of them attaching their product to actually players in our industry. So I think that's an interesting step. We've watched them develop some pretty amazing ideas, and they've kind of been like Future Watch, but this appears to be their entry into the industry. So take a quick look at that. Also, another one of our sponsors, Buildings IT, has a tremendous thrust on LinkedIn, posting almost more than Automated Buildings. But this is one of the ones I caught, that Smart Building Architecture with the US Green Buildings. They've got a seminar coming up, summit, and they talk about that, and they're going to be speaking at that as well. We're all busy focused on what's happening on Monday Live, but there's a lot of chitter chatter going on social media. So I'm trying to keep up. I'm not doing it well, but I'm trying. Back to you, Anto.
You're doing really well, Ken. Thank you. Thanks for that. I've brought up this site every quarter, actually, for the past year or so, because I think this is sort of insightful in terms of seeing trends in the IoT space and in the sort of general technology space. And so what, just as a reminder, what these guys do is that they scour public quarterly reports by large corporations globally. And they basically look at all the words that various people and those those sort of companies and earnings calls and things say, and then they basically map out the words and the terms that's been said, compare it to the previous quarter, and see the increase and decline of certain subjects, certain topics, certain words. And what's clear looking at this chart for this quarter, for quarter 3 of 23, is AI. It's kind of AI everywhere. So the way to read this chart is it's in quadrants. So this quadrant at the top right is the big issues that are growing in importance, and this is the small but growing in importance, and the items below the line, the sort of the lower quadrants, are things that are reducing in importance. So AI is pretty much everywhere. As you can see there, different takes on AIs, and even ChatGPT was not mentioned hardly, or declining in mention. So I thought that was interesting. But there was also this sort of quote that I think goes to what we've been talking about with regards to AI, that generative AI is at the forefront of customers' conversations. Okay, that's what one specific CEO is saying. However, enterprises are also realizing that they can't have an AI strategy without a data strategy to base it on. Right? So without data, you can't really do AI. And that's kind of obvious if you sit and think about it. But in the sort of in the hubbub about AI, I think a lot of people sort of miss that. And I thought this guy, the CEO from Snowflake, I don't know what that company is all about, sort of nails it in the head, on the head, the way I see it. So I thought this was interesting.
It's an AI company, by the way.
It is, yeah. It's an AI database company.
Okay, there you go. They would say that, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
I must say, I'm extremely disappointed in this, in that I don't see Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift on here. And it's just
next week.
What kind of data are you showing us, Anto?
It's running a week behind, obviously.
Yeah, so anyway, thought that was interesting. Moving on, over to Rick.
Office hours on Thursday. So use the link to sign up, and we're going to be talking about some of those, some of these topics that we've been working on with 2525 and cloud native, and how all that applies to what we're trying to get ready to show at AHR in December. Is it December or is it January? January in Chicago. So use the link to sign up, and it'll be an open session for Q&A, plus a couple of presentations for just updates on what the coalition has been working on, specifically, as I said, IBB, cloud native, 2525. And we'll have fun with that, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick. And so our links, as normal, for those that want to find these links. Any other thoughts before we move on to metamorphosing?
Yeah, we just have one thing here in London. The news, and they actually make the national newspapers, is that Meta actually paid off British, I think it was British Land, £149 million to get out of their lease. So they signed a lease for 20 years, and they've now paid 149 million just to get out of the lease, because they don't want the building, don't need it with enough space. So between that and HSBC saying they're pulling out of Canary Wharf, it's obviously people are getting very concerned now about the commercial building market, and what that actually means for it.
Where was that Meta property that
it was right in the city? It was right in the center of the city. So it's it was a newer building. They never actually even occupied it. Okay, so they bought a 20-year lease about two or 3 years ago, and they're occupied, but they've now just paid us 149 million, I think it is, to cancel it, which is equivalent to about 7 years' rent, I think, is what they're saying.
Did they publish a supporting statement of why they made that?
Yeah,
decision?
hybrid working, and less
So the
less need for space. They don't need as much space as they thought they would have done.
Yeah, everybody's using Facebook and WhatsApp instead of going to the office, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you this, this is consistent. I was having, over the weekend, I was golfing with a gentleman who's got three sons who are all essentially white collar workers, and all of them are had traditionally, gone to offices, and all three of them are no longer doing that. So I think what Roger just reported on, I think is a worldwide trend, if you will, and it's unquestionably going to affect the office market like we've been talking about.
Yeah. And, British Land actually said that it's going to hit their figures for the next year or so, but they said what they're thinking of doing with the building is to change it into a science park. I don't know, so they're going to try and repurpose it. Huh?
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, at the same time, sorry, I know at the same time that all that's happening, companies like Facebook and Google and Salesforce are reaching back out to try to rehire people that they let go. So that's a trend that's also happening. So yeah, it's interesting.
Actually, another big picture is this company now has $147 million to expend on the building, retrofitting it into a science park.
Yep.
It's an opportunity.
Right.
I know you just posted something on chat.
Yeah, it's a link from, if you know Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. He's a big investor. He has a thesis on what's going to happen on the commercial market. That's just one of the links. If you just search Mr. Wonderful and commercial building market. Sorry. Thanks. Thanks, Andrew.
Right. I did the same thing as well with my link. Okay.
But yeah, interesting too. And he's actually extending that to see what the impact will be to banks who are owning all the loans on these buildings.
I was also reading a piece. Unfortunately, it was behind a paywall, so I didn't use it here as a link. About this is not commercial real estate; it's about China, and about the what they've done in China in terms of building all of the residential towers. And somebody was doing a calculation that basically said that they have enough housing in China to house potentially up to like 3 billion people. And bear in mind, there's only like 1.4 billion people in China. I think that may be a little bit exaggerating, but still, it's a huge amount of real estate that's not going to be used in China.
Yeah.
Again, not commercial, but
yeah. I actually heard the term that they have enough vacancies for every person in France to live there. And 25% of their GDP has been in real estate over this growth phase. Compare that to the US, which runs at about 15%.
To basically build buildings that nobody's going to occupy. Yeah. That's a good way of increasing your GDP.
Yeah.
Okay. One stage they were talking about building something like 41 airports as well. So I mean, it's the whole thing which they were just throwing money at.
All right, let's move on then. Industry metamorphosis. So we in planning we came up with this theme really as a follow-up to last month's theme of the changing landscape. And just as a reminder, I tried to sort of put into a bullet list all of the various things that we talked about in September, everything from Office Armageddon to post-COVID sort of changes, decarbonization, big demographics changes, economic uncertainty everywhere, sort of generational thing that's going on between boomers and zoomers. Experience expectations from everybody, mainly from the smartphone, cloud native. People are going there. The workforce skill gap that we have in our industry, and demands for information. This is just sort of a quick summary. But out of all of that, the thinking of this group when we were sort of planning this month is that this is going to change things. Or these issues are going to change things in this industry, because we're right in the middle of the real estate, the commercial real estate. So the intent is really to have a conversation about in what way this is going to change, what are the opportunities, what is the changes that needs to happen from a business model perspective, from a supply chain, and a whole bunch of other things. So this is really the purpose of this month. And this week, we're just going to have an open discussion about what this is likely to do to our industry. So I'm going to stop my share and open it up to the panel.
I could kick off with something if you like, and so is that I guess the kind of rise of the MSI is something that's actually still in transition, that role, but it's one of the things it's actually doing is bringing the occupiers and the real estate guys and people like that closer to us than they have before, because, well, the MSI is touching both areas, the practicalities of being on site, but also the demands of the customer. And that is something we've tried to get for many years, is closer to the people who occupy and the people who own the buildings, the people who run it. And the industry we've been in has just been so far from that. We've always been through this contractual chain of consultants and mechanical contractors. And I think that's a change we're certainly seeing here now, that it's we're getting a little bit closer.
Are you sort of mentioning this from a perspective of the changes that you've spoken about specifically in the UK in terms of...
I mean, that's just the experience here, is that we're seeing that change, that owners are getting smarter and the occupiers are going, are demanding more needs. And so it's bringing them closer to our industry. So there is a change where the people who actually can occupy or own the buildings are actually getting engaged. Previously, the only people we ever got engaged with were mechanical contractors and consultants.
And can you speak to in what way are they needing to be engaged? I mean, what are they?
Yeah,
that conversation.
So they're kind of looking out here, and it's a little bit something we covered last week. Was talking about the smarter buildings, buildings with more intelligence and more capability are certainly attracting customers. There was an article in Sunday Times actually based around the Meta thing, actually mentioning that smarter buildings are actually bringing higher lease rates when they do let. And I think that that's what's driving the real estate guys to actually get closer to the demands of what goes on in the building than they ever have before, because they know if they've got a Japanese bank coming in or someone that is demanding about the conditions or whatever in the building, that they're going to have to make sure that that building is being run well, does actually provide lots of capabilities that perhaps weren't always existing in there before, whether it's smart desks, optimizing space, visitor registrations, even on the technical side, integrating with BIM to make life easier for people. I think we're seeing more of that now being driven from the real estate guys that was never in place before. And that's being driven by the fact that they know that they've got to lease these buildings, and therefore they've got to make them smarter.
Yeah, Roger, that. And I would also imagine on the consumer side, the consumption side, these people all of a sudden, for the first time in history, see what's available. I'm like, wait, I could have a moving desk. I could have a window. I mean, there's so much coming at us. Like, you could have this, you could have that. Yeah, you not only could you should. It's your right. And so now we're asking for it.
Yeah, becoming a shopper's market, right? As opposed to
Yeah.
There's a phenomena called the flattening of the supply chain. And that's, I think, what we're talking about in our industry as well, is like, as this information becomes more readily available, what products are, the consumer or the buyer starts to want to flatten the supply chain. It cut out, in effect, cut out middlemen. It's not exactly how it happens, but that flattening results in a change in how you make your product, how you engage the MSIs or the consultants or whatever. And I think that's that's happening all over in different industries. And I think that's happening in our industry.
By
I think we're
flattening,
seeing-
are you meaning reducing the number of players in the supply chain? Is that what you meant by flattening?
Well, it's a phenomenon across different industries where, again, as you become more educated at what's available, you want to the supply. So supply and demand get closer to each other for at least for a while, as industries mature.
Yeah.
I
mean,
think we're heading for this time when user experience is king. And it's changing everything. And the fact that we have hybrid offices and the people are stepping out of their own designed offices and walking into buildings, they want those same experiences. And that's just holding our nose to the equation very quickly. And I think that's part of the transformation that's occurring.
Yeah. Guys, I want to throw out a concept of what goes around comes around. I think based on rising energy prices and softening demand for space, that we could be easily entering a energy management 2.0 era. In the 1980s, these things weren't called building automation; they were called energy management systems. And if you look at what's going on right now with building owners trying to find ways to not raise their lease rates because that's going to be very increasingly hard because of the soft demand, that means they need to cut costs. And and I think we've talked for several years now that most building owners really don't take energy management seriously. They want the controls certainly to maintain comfort, but they haven't taken the reduction of energy or the minimization, is that a word? Minimizing energy consumption seriously. And because energy prices have risen significantly and are forecast to rise even more as because of what's going on a worldwide basis, I think this is going to be the dawn of a whole new trend towards building owners saying, what can you do to cut my energy costs? And we know we can do it, but we haven't been pressured to do it. And yes, there should be some new elements to it in addition to what we can do on the control side. But I think there's a real opportunity here to recast ourselves. Hopefully, Mark could come up with a new way to describe it. But I throw that out there as what is needed right now, or an opportunity for us. Let's put it that way. What do you think?
I guess was there ever a 1.0, as you say, Steve? They kind of paid lip service to it, whilst the industry was trying to push energy savings. The occupiers weren't that interested. Whereas I think that right there is something that is a metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is that people are now taking, an interest in energy, and also obviously the whole ESG thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they have to be seen to be green as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, does that morph into the sustainability trend that's going on, and with ESG and everything else? Because that would make sense to me.
That was always ruined by the triple net lease, which had like a myriad of leases in a very large building. It'd be interesting to see if we see that disappear, because anybody that was like renting, 2,000 or 3,000 square feet will probably not bother going into that building. People that were renting 100,000 feet will think about it. So we might see a concentration of bigger leasers, and then it's much easier to control, because it actually is a dollar figure. But if you're trying to deal with somebody at 2,000 feet, it's not a discussion.
Mm.
One of the things I'm hearing is no silver bullet answer to any of this. It seems to be a number of smaller or individual contributing factors that are layering up upon one another to maybe drive something to actually change. Anyone else kind of feeling or seeing that?
Another solution, I think it came up in the Wednesday discussion, we talked about a growth of people connecting themselves to properties on a local basis, and people with capabilities that can actually make this stuff happen. So we're seeing a kind of a trend maybe away from big companies to small people who can actually make this happen. And because they have the reach and the technology, they can make this happen. So we're seeing, and it's starting to become quite regionalized. So the whole idea of centralization and distributed interaction is occurring as well, I believe.
Well, Ken, that's interesting to me. And it goes to what Steve said about Mark. He's like, well, maybe this could be, to me, it's almost a marketing thing. Who was that guy, Ken, from the 60s and 70s, the famous Canadian, who said, the medium is the message?
Marshall McLuhan?
Yeah. All right. And so the question is, Ken speaking to, is where along the spectrum, who along the spectrum is best positioned to be a modern medium to bring a modern message to these building owners? Have they been hearing the same thing from their local controls contractor, and they're like, or the big boys? It's an interesting question of who's going to deliver this modern message, and that deliverer creates a context of, oh yeah, that's the medium is the message. Something to think about.
Bit in the piece I dropped on Passive Logic, that appears to be their solution, is to basically push this out to a much lower level than I'd imagined. Just take a look at who their supporters are.
Yeah. So Ken, to your point about distributing the information, or the energy, getting away from the triple net leases. Okay. So I would tie that to the fact that these commercial buildings in particular are no longer going to have huge anchor tenants who essentially bear the cost of the building. Okay. So my prediction is you're going to have far more smaller tenants, and to make that work, they're going to want to pay only for the energy they use. They want to be able to control that, right? So from our standpoint, we're in a position to provide that. Do that. We can break the energy bill down into these sub meters, if you will, and thereby allow these, because as a building owner, you're no longer going to be able to, if you got a 10-story building, fill up 8 stories with one tenant. I think those days are over. So how do you attract, and how do you go about attracting the smaller tenants in greater volume? Because you're not used to doing that. And one way to do that is to tell them that, hey, you can only pay, yes, here's the space, nice Class A1 space, but by the way, you only need to pay for the energy you use. Right.
I think what we're seeing is basically a move and a following of the WeWork model, but not using rework. We're starting to see independents in local areas jumping up that know the market, and they basically are consolidating the hybrid crowd. So when in fact they do need a meeting room, they go and they basically can pull that meeting room out of a nice complex. That's what we're seeing locally here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ken. I just we were having a discussion the other day with some folks, and that was exactly the message. Someone said WeWork's actually got it right. That was just a few years too early.
And I think the scale of what they were trying is not scalable. I think it works better in a model where the person who is the WeWork company is known in the town and has trust and
Right.
and basically, or has some skin in the game. Maybe he owns the building, whatever. There's some reason for him to provide this service that is important to him. So he's going to do it the best he knows how.
So that trend would require a building owner to be much more nimble about how the systems and how to break out and so that the different tenants can get what they want out of it in a very flexible manner.
It is what the client is selling. It is what the person who is actually paying the lease is actually selling. He's selling that flexibility to be able to automatically open up a boardroom and have a meeting and close it down with nobody being involved.
And somebody else use it, in a couple of hours' time.
Mhm.
And then you've got to have the application that allows you to charge for that, hooking it into the energy being used to actually do for that room, and so it starts getting, the multi-tenanted building starts becoming quite complex, and how you're charging for the space that they use.
Yeah. Roger, to your point, I think what you're
for
saying.
building.
Sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
I was just saying, we're back to something we mentioned a few weeks ago, which is Uber for building space, right? Just a really easy app that everybody can understand and get the space they need when they need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you need all the infrastructure behind it to support that, of course. The
And even
controls and
even the movability of it. When I'm in Chicago, I want to have an office in Chicago, and then I want one in New York, and then I want one, so that whole flexibility of having that service that it doesn't need to be the same company, but I need the same service.
Yeah. So Roger, to your point about, I just want to make sure on the conference, as an example, on conference rooms, instead of when you fit out your office space, instead of having your own dedicated conference rooms, particularly large ones, stop doing that. Create shared conference rooms in the office tower that you can lease out on demand on a schedule, and you pay extra for that, but only when you need them.
Yeah.
And otherwise, you have maybe small conference rooms. Basically only have the space that you absolutely need day in, day out.
Yeah.
And anything else should be on a shared basis.
You lease by the year, by the month, by the week, by the hour, by
Right.
the day, whatever you want.
So at the end of the day, this is not new. I mean, this what we're talking about here has been going on for 25 years. Let me give you an example. So prior to joining Tritium many years ago, I worked for a marketing technology consulting company who was based in Redwood City, California. All right, great. Silicon Valley. The idea was to expand and open up on the East Coast, which was part of my job. So I rented out office space in Miami, Richmond, Maryland, and Boston with companies who specialized in this. We took 2 offices here, 2 offices there. When we needed conference room, you reserved it, so forth and so on. We paid a flat monthly fee, did not charge for the conference room. As long as it was open and you reserved it, it was included in the lease, in the rent, or whatever you want to call it. So what we're talking about, Steve, I think you started talking about this earlier, how history repeats itself. We're just repeating ourselves here, other than we now have technology behind it to further support it and hopefully make it a lot easier than it was back in the day.
I guess the change we're seeing, Mark, is it's on a bigger scale perhaps now.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to bring up, is that so we've seen it in pockets, right? But what's sort of being discussed here is this is likely to be the prevalent or the sort of the default way that people think about commercial real estate. So whether it's true or not, we don't know for certain, but I think the trend is going in that direction. So I guess the question then is that what does that do? What opportunities does that open up for us, for this industry, and how does it change the industry? How do we service a commercial real estate industry that behaves that way, that is much more nimble?
Yeah, our term for it, Anto, is dynamic, right? It's the dynamic nature of it. That's what we actually describe it as, and how we describe that nature. There's a fundamental change in everything you do in the building because of that dynamism. It's not, it's not just, is there a desk available, but do I need to clean it? Do I need to air condition it? Do I need to have lighting for it? Is it better if I put everybody in the south end versus the north end because of different systems that I've got? There's a lot of interesting parameters and levers that you can pull and adjust and turn based on that dynamic thing, which is only really solvable with technology, right? You just can't have enough people running around trying to make those decisions. You have to do that with technology.
But specifically, information is about the information about stuff, about the state of the spaces, the requirements of users, etc., and the specification, etc. It's all about information, not about the controls or the automation or the
well, it's the information that feeds into those things, right? That you have to, and that has to be. I guess my point was all that has to be automatic and seamless, and then the experience for the tenant has to be wonderful because you want no friction in that experience, right? You want someone turns up, I expect, to be told where to go, how to go, and have a seamless experience. I don't need to be trying to find out, is the coffee around the corner if this is the first time I'm there, or, there's the whole experience and then the environment to manage that one person who turned up. So it's actually kind of an interesting space at the moment and again, you can only really do that with technology. You need the data, you need the software, you need the ability to interface to it all, to manage it all, including the occupant experience itself. But that's what folks are looking for, right? They're not coming back. So how do we make this thing more dynamic? How do we adjust what we have to what's happening?
And the reality is, left out of the mechanical systems and the control systems that are not built for anything you just described. We've been describing. We've been talking a lot about user experience of real estate, but the mechanical systems that were put into those buildings and that are still being put into these buildings are not designed to have granular control.
No.
So you can't have. So we, as our industry, we got nothing we can do for most buildings relative to the user experience because the control systems that were installed, the mechanical systems that were installed are not granularly controllable. And so that's a problem.
But that's not true from a VAV standpoint. VAV could go very, very precisely.
Which controls?
VAV, independent VAV boxes, as opposed, right? So if you got multi-zone, I agree with you, but with variable air volume, you can assign those to spaces quite directly.
If you've got the right control system, and I guess that's what I'm getting at is kind of bringing it back to our industry and what can we do for which kinds of spaces and what can't we do and what can we give as direction for those poor people that are stuck with a building that does not have.
I understand. I'm just saying in the office market, generally speaking, you got variable air volume and you have individual controllers on every box. And so you can segment, you can very precisely associate particular boxes with particular tenants and then control them however they want them controlled.
And I think it goes, Rick, it goes back to what Anta was asking about, was what opportunities are there for our industry. And I think that the opportunities are that they're going to have to redesign and refurbish, because they're going to have to refurbish the building anyway to have multi-tenanted buildings as opposed to the one, or even multi-tenants for one floor. So that will be an opportunity for the retrofit refurbish market is always 75% of what we do anyway, maybe even more, but it's going to become even more as the newer construction begins to grind to a halt. So I think that's where people can, got an opportunity when these buildings are going to be having to change, and be refurbished. You have to redesign the mechanical plant and the controls along with the floor layouts and the different services they're going to be provided.
I think
Okay.
Rick is going to be iterative. To be honest, you're right. There's not a building who doesn't have the level of the granularity. You might have it at a floor by floor basis, not maybe a zone by zone basis, maybe, But my point is, I think if they see the ability to be flexible, and if there's technologies to be flexible, building owners will start to adopt them. A simple example. Did you guys see that? What they called Nuva, the guy who had the little individual zone unit that you can plug into your duct system, and it's controllable, and I think it's got Bluetooth and stuff. Anyway, they were at ASHRAE or somewhere. There's some, there is some interesting techs that are starting to look into the space. But to your point, I think it's not going to be, I can control it down to the desk level, but maybe I can control it to the floor level initially. And then if I add tech, if that works, then the next level of tech is go drive it a bit further. And the next level of tech is drive it further. It's proving the case, right?
You're muted, Bill. If
Bill, you're muted.
Time to speak. You're still muted.
Okay, I find this conversation to be so fascinating, almost like we've lifted up a rock and uncovered something. So here is Rick Justice. You got these guys who've been in the industry, they're stalwarts in the industry. I've been sitting on these calls for years. This call, for the first time ever, I hear from a guy, Rick, he's like, our industry's not even set up for those things we've been talking about for 3 years. I'm fascinated by that. And I'm still looking at Rick, and he thinks he's got a point, and he probably does. And then the other guys, depending on where they work, they're like, oh, no. Every building I've seen has got VAVs and controllers. And then half the guys go, no. It's really interesting to see this right here. And then, I don't know, honestly, you come with just beautiful, Australian optimism. Be it's floor level or building level.
Yeah, go build the bloody thing. What the hell?
I'm surprised at this whole conversation right now. I'm a little bit blown away. So much for metamorphosis.
The real world, and even the VAVs, Steve, to your point, a lot of VAVs are still pneumatic. I would say probably 40 to 60%, no visibility at all.
Really? Well, okay, I hear you. And that's why I said Energy Management 2.0. So I started this business in 81, okay, when everything was pneumatic or solid state electronics.
That's right.
And there were no time clocks even to schedule the energy. And then gradually things morphed into DDC. But the point was, when you walked the building, you found out what was there. You found out what the low-hanging fruit was. Oh, let's put a time clock function in for starters, right? And then, how about we take those receiver controllers, those pneumatics, and replace it with a DDC controller so we can get more accurate, precise control over the use of the cooling and the heating. And some of it was mechanical work, some of it was pure control work. But you would put together a whole basically laundry list, and not mentioning names, but there was a big company who had a whole book that I read that described all these energy management methodologies that you would adopt. And guys, we could, the whole thing can be respun for 2020s here, right? And why not? Why not? Because it's not just about reducing energy for the sake of reducing energy. There's the whole green movement where buildings are going to be, for the sustainability, have to reduce their energy you got programs in Boston, programs in Washington, D.C., and these other cities where they're being mandated to cut their energy usage.
Would it,
So
would
let's
it
get
be,
let's
would
get
it be
creative
more,
here.
would it be more interesting to think about the energy question that you raise, Steve, as part of the electrification? Because then you have another component of not just reducing energy, it's actually making the consumption of energy, the shape of the consumption better for the grid, so that, you know, it makes the whole system more efficient. Is that part of what you're talking about, Energy 2.0?
From the standpoint of meeting the sustainability goals, for sure. So whether that's moving, being less dependent on fossil fuels, perhaps, but more to the point of adding in solar or other kinds of local generation to get, to reduce your dependency on the grid. So I think there's that as well, Anto, for sure.
Right,
And
so it's not just let's cut your energy by 10% and there's
Right.
the ROI for that. That was 1.0. So
Two points I'd like to make is, I think where we're heading towards the Uberization of office space. So basically the office looks like an Uber car. It appears where you want it, when you want it. And so that's one concept. The other side on the energy bit is we're also looking at a grid that is rapidly changing, that is moving from carbon to renewable resources. ESG is driving that thing. So we're not only concerned with how much energy we use, we're now asking the question, where does that energy come with? And that also fits into the Uberization model. And that would have to be whether you actually get a limo or whether you get a Prius when you order your Uber car. And so that is going to be kind of all weaved into that. So I think we've got some models to follow, and I think that's the journey we're starting on.
I think you could actually even extend that thought, Ken, on like I said, the alternative energies. Especially if you look at what Tesla's doing with their Tesla roof and their Tesla batteries and stuff, it's going to be easier to electrify your home than is trying to do solar power your home than it is trying to do a whole building downtown, right? So if you're going to distribute your building out into the environments, then encourage them to put solar and batteries in their house, as opposed to trying to put solar on a large downtown commercial building, trying to drive a chiller. That's never going to happen.
If we use the app, the Google Earth app that actually looks and calculates the potential of roof solar, it becomes obvious that if I've got a high-rise building that has a roof footprint of this much and 500,000 square feet, and I've got this other one that has 1,000 feet and maybe has 2,000 feet of roof, where the equation is the correct answer.
So after all this talk, ladies and gentlemen, my question is this: how are solution providers, whether they be manufacturers, whether they be MSIs, SIs, contractors, consultants, everybody allied to this industry, how then, if we're going to metamorphosize this, how is our business models going to change or have to change? Are we going to follow what's been done previous, what's the business model that essentially we all have been following for the last 40, 50 years or whatever it is? Or does this now become a truly as a service model? Does it become a as a service and buy hardware software model? I don't know. Inquiring minds want to know.
Well, I think the driving word or the driving force is flexibility, or what's the word you were using, Anno?
We call it dynamic.
Okay, dynamic. But the ability to change, which is actually not very, it's not how we've been thinking about buildings. The way we think about buildings is we construct them and leave them there for 30 years or maybe 10 years or whatever, and then refurb, but you know, that's kind of thing. Now it can't be that now. It has to be a much smaller time horizon. I don't know what that is, whether it's hours or days, probably days and weeks, something like that.
Probably weeks, but yeah.
You know, the thing that's coming out of that discussion though is we've been thinking energy is the killer app that's going to drive this, whether you call it energy savings or carbon or whatever. I think it's much more practical, like you were just describing, Anto, and a need from an owner's standpoint to be flexible and capable of morphing their buildings into what they need them to be. Multi-tenant, one big tenant, fractional tenants, whatever it might be. And it's going to be something like that that's going to drive this more than any of the stuff that we've been talking about historically here.
Yeah,
I think our business is changing, Mark, to answer your question significantly.
but it's
And to everybody's point, we've got to be flexible. And I think there are many who are flexible and there are many who are not, but I think flexibility will end up being the driver because let's face it, the way owners, and we've repeatedly discussed this, if we're talking office buildings, especially, is the way they have to operate and manage them is completely different than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Let's face it. Everything that everybody's contributed.
Yeah, and you got to, and to your point, Mark, you got to to answer your question a little bit, you got to put your head into the, your mind into the head of the building owner, because part of his challenge is he has to change his business model in the first place, right? And that's the big challenge, and we were actually having this discussion a little while back, a couple of weeks ago. You know, the whole reason that we had or traditionally have commercial buildings downtown was because it wasn't so much about community. It was never about getting together and having meetings. It was always because that's where the infrastructure was. That's where the computers were. That's where the internet was. That's where the telephone system was. You know, that's where the fax machine was. That's where the printing machine was. That's where you did your Zoom meetings, because all that infrastructure existed in the one place, and it just made doing your business easier. What the pandemic was moved all that infrastructure out to your house, and we decided, yeah, the infrastructure exists now, and now we've got the people are saying, well, it's all about the community and getting together and sharing the ideas. That's true, but it's not 5 days a week, 25, whatever it is, 8 hours a day type model anymore. So we no longer need the infrastructure downtown as a driving force to get us there. So the building owner has to say, well, if it's not infrastructure anymore, if it's not all that services, because I could be getting it, you can get that at home, what value do I actually bring as a building owner downtown?
You know,
that's a key question.
Something that just came to me is we have a major misalignment going on here between all the players here in the market, right? We've got technology that moves extremely fast and changes literally overnight. We've got now a mentality where we don't need that central infrastructure. And when I do need to get together, it's only for a short period of time. And then we've got a traditional leasing model that says, I want long-term commitments from all of my customers. Everything else about what's going on is contrary to the way we've always looked at building space from an owner standpoint, right? I want a tenant, or I want to self-occupy for long periods of time, and nothing about that is aligned with what's going on today.
No.
But the buildings, this is probably the time to point this out. It struck me a couple of weeks ago. Buildings that were built downtown, they've maybe outlived their usefulness. Buildings were programmed for particular use. They were designed to last 30 to 50 years by somebody who invested in buying them for a reason. And it's like they've served their purpose. You know, think about it. When somebody builds a building, how long do they really expect to be in there? Not very long. Buildings are built, with a useful life. And we're like mourning the fact that these 70-year-old buildings that were built to be 50-year buildings are not going to last another 120. I mean, it doesn't make sense. But as an industry, for us to be focused on their conversion and then the how do you build flexible buildings, that makes sense. But sort of mourning these ghosts is interesting. But I think we owe it to we not repeat some of these mistakes.
I think I'd like to point out that that although we are seeing the demise of the office building, that is actually not 100% of the real estate stock. And in fact, for the building automation industry, office space has primarily been B and C accounts. The A accounts are higher education, healthcare, pharmaceutical and life sciences, government, military, manufacturing. And as we see a swing back towards more manufacturing in the country, I think that trend continues. And that is something that you're not going to do at home. You're not going to do arc welding in your basement or run a biochemical test lab in your basement. So there are going to be lots of buildings where you still need to go, and the industry won't change that much. A myopic focus on office alone as being this business, I think, would be a mistake to look at it that way. That said, the percentage of buildings that are in office are in trouble. I acquiesce to that.
So I got to tell you, to your point, Jim, fun story. I'm actually here in Los Angeles this week, and I was with my son, and they've just bought some horrendously expensive condo in Pasadena, which are crazy prices, and we're driving down semi-deserted, strip mall spaces, and there are offices there, that he could actually have bought for half the price. And he goes, "Why didn't I just buy an office and pretend to live there?" But to your point, I think that talks back to the repurposing point, right? If you are doing arc welding, if you are is there opportunities to repurpose some of these places for things that do need more of a location or reason to be there, right? And which is kind of my point earlier about the building owners themselves have to think about if the infrastructure that they used to provide, internet, phones, fax, computers, desks, printers and stuff, no longer applies, what do I have to offer to make someone want to come back into my building? Maybe it's an arc welding, infrastructure.
Series of rooms,
quick point.
just collaborative space. All the offices turned into conference rooms.
Right.
Just a quick point would be, though, that as the population moves from the city centers, so will healthcare and so will education. And I think education's in real trouble because I don't think we're going to see a lot more building. I don't know what it's like where you guys are, but our education was driven by foreign students, and the reduction in foreign students is basically almost curtailing that. So, and again, the idea of smaller campuses everywhere rather than bigger campuses in Central is kind of losing fashion as well. So I think there will be some changes in what has traditionally been pretty firm location based.
I agree with your thesis, Ken, that higher education is out over its skis. I mean, we know that the business model is completely broken. In the United States, no one can afford college. And there's been, just a building boom, which has to come to an end in that sector as well. But that said, I'm not making the bet that the cities are going to empty out. I see just the opposite. I think that people live in cities because they want to. They live there for social reasons, for entertainment, for culture. And I see a lot of cities doing just fine. But metamorphosizing, if you will, from downtown office into mixed-use residential quite successfully.
I'm going with the
It's an inversion. People live in cities because that's where they want to live, and all the businesses and manufacturing companies now go out to the suburbs instead, right? Where it used to be the other way around.
Okay, so we should bring this to a close. We're past the top of the hour. I think this sort of gives us a sort of a nice structure. I think what we talked about here, dynamics, flexibility, and information is a key part of what's going to happen. So we'll spend the remainder of the Mondays in October to sort of dissect this from very specific perspective on how it's going to change our industry. So really looking forward to that. So
right. And
stuff.
Steve Jones, good to see you back. See you, buddy.
So with that, let's wrap this. We'll get the video up tomorrow or thereabouts. Otherwise, have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye now.
Yeah. Bye.